The man hadn't meant to stop for long. Just a quick fill-up on the edge of a two-lane road that curved through the outskirts of nowhere. The pump clicked quietly in the cool morning air, and the wind carried the scent of dry weeds and rusted metal. But then he noticed it, a stillness that wasn't part of the landscape. She was lying there, curled tight beside the base of the pump, ribs rising faintly under matted fur. Her legs were folded awkwardly beneath her, one paw twitching slightly. Her eyes were open, watching, not pleading, not wide with fear, just open, quiet. He crouched instinctively, lowering himself slowly, careful not to close the distance too quickly. The dog didn't flinch. There was no bark, no growl, no sudden rise. She remained where she was, her breath uneven and shallow. Dirt clung to the fur along her spine, and the bones beneath her skin pressed out sharply like the architecture of an old house long abandoned. A truck rumbled past on the road behind them, and the wind tugged at the man's jacket. He held out a hand but didn't touch her. There was no leash, no collar. Just a silence between them that felt older than both of them, drawn across miles of road and lost time. "It's okay, girl," he said quietly. His voice was barely more than a breath. "I see you." The dog blinked, slow. Her body trembled once, then stilled again. It was not fear. It was cold, hunger, and exhaustion that made her limbs unsteady. Still, she didn't back away. The man glanced toward the small station building, but it looked empty. A closed sign leaned against the door. No movement inside. He reached into the cab of his truck, rummaged for anything, half a sandwich wrapped in paper. He returned slowly, crouched again, and unwrapped it a few inches from her paws. The scent drifted between them. She didn't lunge or gobble it down. Instead, she raised her head a little, sniffed, and hesitated. Her mouth opened slightly, dry tongue flicking. Then, with careful, aching movement, she stretched her neck forward and took a piece into her mouth. Her teeth met the bread like it might break if she bit too hard. He watched, heart pressing against his chest. This wasn't the wild panic of a stray. This was the quiet resignation of a creature who had stopped expecting kindness. She didn't avoid his eyes, she didn't hide, but she didn't come closer either. The sky above them was pale with the early rise of sun, streaked with soft silver and gray. Birds circled high above the trees in the distance, but here, just stillness. The dog chewed slowly, then laid her head back down. The sandwich remained, untouched beside her. It wasn't hunger that kept her there. It was fatigue deeper than appetite. He sat down, not too close, just enough that she could see he wasn't leaving. A few cars passed, but none stopped. Dust rose and fell. Time felt slowed, stretched. She slept for a few minutes, or something like sleep, a half dozen. When her eyes opened again, he was still there. He spoke again, barely louder than before. "You don't have to move yet." The woman who finally stepped out from behind the gas station building carried a trash bag and a broom. Her eyes scanned the man, then the dog, and her mouth softened with recognition. "She's been here 2 days," she said gently. "Wouldn't let me near her. Figured someone dumped her." The man didn't respond at first. He just nodded. The kind of nod that says, "I figured." "Didn't have the heart to call anyone," she added, quieter. "She doesn't look like she'd survive the pound." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of voices. She didn't lift her head this time. Her body was beginning to curve in on itself, folding inward, still breathing but less certain. The man stood slowly, walked back to his truck. The woman watched as he returned with an old wool blanket, faded and frayed. He laid it down beside the dog, inch by inch, letting it brush the ground near her paws. The dog lifted her head again. Her nose twitched. She didn't retreat. After a long pause, she shifted, barely, onto the edge of the cloth. A soft sigh left her mouth, as if her body recognized warmth even before it could name it. The man didn't touch her. Not yet. But he remained, kneeling, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes level with hers. The birds had flown farther now. The sun had crested the trees. The wind moved through the grass along the fence line, whispering across the earth like a story half remembered. In that quiet, on the edge of a lonely road, a dog who had once belonged somewhere, to someone, lay beside a man who didn't turn away. He didn't know her name, but he stayed. The morning had stretched into late light, its warmth pulling gently over cracked pavement and dry fields beyond the road. The man waited, quiet beside her, his knees folded beneath him. He had not moved quickly, nor spoken much, but something had shifted, not in words, but in time itself. The dog, thin and silent, still lay at the edge of the blanket, head resting flat against the soft wool. Her breath had steadied, if only slightly, but her body held a stillness that spoke of more than rest. It was the stillness of preservation, of something holding on by thread and memory. Eventually, she stirred. It began with the slow lift of her head, her ears rotating toward the man's shifting coat as he adjusted his position. She blinked, slowly, eyes narrowed against the light. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he sat back on his heels and lowered his eyes, letting her see him without pressure. The world around them had grown quieter, as if holding its breath. The man unfolded the last bite of bread from the sandwich wrapper and placed it a little farther from her nose this time, nudging it gently forward. She watched. Her nostrils flared once, then again. And then, with a long pause between breath and movement, she began to rise. Her forelegs moved first, shaky beneath her chest. One paw slid forward, then held. Her back legs trembled even before they lifted. It was not grace, nor strength. It was will, or instinct. She rose unevenly, ribs heaving, her stance uncertain. Her legs splayed for a moment as she adjusted to the sudden weight. She blinked again, slower this time, as though standing had stolen a week's worth of energy. The man didn't speak. He waited. Her steps were small, more like shifts than strides. Each limb seemed unsure of its place, and her body angled slightly as she leaned into the effort. She reached the food and paused, licking it once, twice before taking it fully into her mouth. The chewing was slow, methodical, not ravenous. Just necessary. When she looked up again, the man had risen, taking a step backward toward his truck. His hand reached for the door but didn't open it. He waited again, watching her. She stood, just barely, her frame swaying gently as the wind picked up across the open lot. Dust lifted and fell around her legs. Her fur was dull, but beneath it, a flicker of movement. Her tail, barely raised, gave a slight shift. He opened the passenger door slowly and reached in. When he stepped away, a second blanket was in his arms. He laid it along the truck floor, smoothing it flat. He didn't pat the seat or make sounds to beckon. He simply left the door open. The dog hesitated. Her ears moved, then tilted forward. She took one step toward him, shaky, halting, then stopped. Her head dropped slightly, eyes focused not on the man but on the ground beneath her. A low sound escaped her throat, not a growl but something raw, a groan pulled from inside her ribs. Her second step followed only after a long pause, then a third. "It's okay, girl," the man whispered. She stepped again, closing the small space between them, each movement stiff with effort. When she reached the open door, she paused. Her nose lifted, catching the scent of old wool, sun-warmed metal, and the faint remnants of human life. Her paw rose slowly to the edge of the floorboard, touched, then dropped. The climb would take more than hunger. It would take trust. The man waited. After another few breaths, she tried again. Her front paws found the edge, and with a soft grunt, she lifted herself just enough to fold into the space. Her back legs followed, less gracefully. Her body collapsed into the blanket, folded tightly, her nose tucked near her stomach. The man closed the door gently. For a while, they didn't move. He sat behind the wheel, not starting the engine. The dog did not sleep, but her eyes fluttered closed and stayed there. The day had shifted. It was no longer about finding or being found. It was about moving forward, even if slowly. When they finally pulled away, the lot behind them emptied again. Dust moved in gentle swirls where her body had once laid. The wind pushed softly through the roadside weeds, and above, the sky was a pale stretch of late-day blue. On the floor of the truck, the dog didn't lift her head, but her breathing stayed steady, and her body, for the first time in a long while, remained at rest. The ride had been quiet. The dog lay curled tightly on the floor of the truck, her ribs moving in a shallow rhythm, eyes closed but never fully asleep. The man drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting in his lap. He spoke only once, a soft word that dissolved into the hum of tires against the road. She didn't respond, but she hadn't tried to escape either. There was a quiet between them. Not comfort yet, but something that held. The sun had dropped lower by the time they reached his small home on the edge of town. It wasn't much, a faded porch, a few trees leaning toward the fence line, but the gate creaked open and the gravel path crunched under the tires like it had been waiting for something to arrive. He parked and opened the door slowly, stepping out without sound. The dog remained where she was, head resting on the edge of the blanket, unmoving. Her ears twitched when he opened the passenger side, but she didn't lift her gaze. He waited, crouched again, just as he had done before. Then, wordless, he walked around the back and unlatched the tailgate. From the shed, he pulled a shallow metal bowl, washed it under the hose, and filled it with water. It sat on the porch now, catching the dimming light. He placed a second bowl beside it. Food this time, soft, warmed from a can, not rushed. He didn't place it near her. He placed it by the front steps and stepped back. Then he waited again. Minutes passed. A breeze moved the dry leaves along the gravel. Birds called out in brief flutters overhead. Inside the truck, the dog shifted. Her head rose slightly, ears angled forward. She did not leap from the vehicle. She didn't wag. Her movement was measured, uncertain. Her front paw reached first, then the second. She tested the step down with care, her body moving in slow, trembling increments. When her paws touched the gravel, she stopped, her legs stiff beneath her. She sniffed the air and walked, not toward the food, but in a slow arc around the porch, circling wide, keeping her distance. He didn't call her. He simply sat on the steps, quiet, his arms resting loosely on his knees. The dog made another small loop. Closer this time, her nose twitching, legs bent slightly as though unsure of each new step. She paused again and studied him. Her tail hung low, not tucked, just low, still. Her ribs moved in shallow pulls. Eventually, she turned toward the bowls. She approached slowly, stopping every few feet. When she reached the food, she sniffed it, but didn't eat. Her tongue flicked at the edge of the bowl. Then she sat. It took another 10 minutes before she began to eat. Each bite was careful, not fast. She chewed with caution, watching between mouthfuls. Her body was alert, but not afraid. There was no tremble now, only tension. Something coiled, but not tight enough to snap. When she drank, it was slow and quiet. The water darkened her snout, dripped from the edge of her jaw, and pooled beneath her feet. The man didn't move. He remained where he was, letting the dusk fill the air around them. Later, when the food was gone and the bowls emptied, she lay down again. Not close, but not far either. She settled near the base of the porch, her head resting on her forelegs. Her eyes stayed open, watching him. Not asking, not pleading, just watching. Inside, the man laid out a second blanket. This one thicker, folded beside a heater in the back room. He left the door open behind him, propping it with a boot. He didn't look back. She didn't follow, but near midnight, when the house had long quieted and the moon lifted faint light over the gravel, her paws crossed the threshold. She walked in slowly, her body low to the ground. Her nails clicked once against the wooden floor. Then silence. She found the blanket. She sniffed it, turned twice, and laid down. Her eyes scanned the room, and her ears shifted at the creak of a distant door, but there was no noise, no movement. She slept in short stretches, not deeply, not peacefully, but slept all the same. When the man passed the room early the next morning, she did not rise. She lifted her head, looked toward him, then laid it down again. Her breath was steady. Over the next few days, trust did not arrive in full. It came in moments. On the way, she allowed the door to close behind her without panic. In this way, her body no longer flinched when he walked across the room. In the way, her eyes followed him with something softer than fear. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't bathe her or bind her wounds with cloth. He simply gave her time to eat, to rest, to remember. Sometimes he spoke, not much, just in passing, in the way one might talk to the wind. "Still here, girl," he'd say, pouring food into the bowl. The days moved like pages in a book with no chapter titles. Each one slightly more certain than the last. The tremble in her legs lessened. Her steps grew smoother, more balanced. Her coat, though still patchy, began to dull less in the sunlight. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and an old jacket, she came up the steps for the first time. Her body brushed lightly against his leg before settling beside him. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the moment pass between them like a breath. She rested her head on the boards, eyes half closed. A wind moved across the yard, lifting the tall grass in soft waves. A bird called once, then fell silent. The bowls sat empty beside them. The light stretched long across the porch. And still she watched him. Not because she feared, but because something in her had begun to stay. It was on the 7th morning that he noticed the tag of skin beneath her neck, the way it shifted slightly as she drank from the bowl. She was stronger now, though still thin. The bones along her back had softened beneath the slow weight of food and rest. Her legs held her steady when she walked across the yard. She no longer circled before eating. And sometimes when he moved from room to room, she followed. That morning, as dew clung to the grass and the sun pushed gently through the fence slats, he crouched beside her while she drank. His hand reached forward, slow and even. Her eyes flicked toward him, but she didn't move. He paused, then reached again. His fingers brushed lightly under her fur. That's when he felt it, smooth, small, and unmistakable. A chip. He said nothing, just let his hand fall back to his side. The town vet was a short drive, past the mill and the quiet bend where trees leaned heavy over the road. She didn't resist when he lifted her into the truck. Her body tensed at first, then softened against the blanket. She no longer curled tightly. Her breathing stayed even. Inside the clinic, he carried her through the door without a leash. The receptionist looked up, eyes wide at the sight of her. The man didn't explain. He just nodded, and she led them to the back. The scanner beeped only once. It took a few moments for the screen to load the record. The vet said her name aloud, softly, and the man looked down at her. The dog didn't react. No recognition in her posture, no flicker in her ears. Just the same steady breath, the same quiet stillness. Her name was May. The report said she had gone missing 3 weeks earlier. Not from nearby. From over 80 miles away past the county line, out near a row of farmland too far to walk without purpose. Her owner had left contact information. The vet offered to call. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the dog. She was resting on the floor now, paws splayed gently outward, tail still and flat. The room was warm, filled with the soft hum of machines and the distant murmur of voices behind a closed door. He sat beside her, resting a hand near her paw without touching. "Let's give it a minute," he said, quiet as breath. Outside, the sun had risen fully. He stood and walked with the vet to the desk. The call was made. The line rang twice. A woman answered. Her voice was cautious at first, then trembling. She hadn't expected a call after this long. She said May had slipped from the gate one evening during a storm. They had searched for days, posted signs, even contacted shelters in nearby towns. Nothing. Then silence. She had believed May was gone. The man listened without interruption. He gave no details of the rescue, only said she had been found, weak but alive. The woman's voice broke once, then steadied. She wanted her back. He nodded, gave his address. That evening, he sat with May on the porch, his boots dusty, the food bowl empty beside him. She rested her head against the step, eyes half closed. She had eaten, bathed, and laid still in the sun for most of the afternoon. There was a different light in her movement now, subtle but present. When he stood to stretch, she rose too. Not quickly, but without the stiffness she once carried. She moved beside him, standing close enough that her shoulder brushed his calf. He looked down, his hand moving briefly to her head. This time she leaned into the touch. He felt the slow exhale through her nose. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. When the car arrived the next day, it pulled in slowly. A woman stepped out, holding a folded piece of paper in her hand and a leash in the other. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the yard. May stood near the man, her tail lowered. She didn't retreat. Her body was alert, her legs still. She watched the woman approach. The man stepped back, giving space. The woman crouched, calling her name once. "May!" The dog tilted her head. Her body didn't move. The woman whispered again, barely audible. May took a step forward, then another. She reached the woman's outstretched hand and sniffed. There was a pause. Then, slowly, May lowered her head against the woman's arm. Not suddenly. "Just contact me." The woman wrapped her arms gently around the dog, holding her for a long time. Her face pressed against May's side. The man stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching. When the embrace ended, May stepped back. She turned slightly toward the man. Her eyes lingered. Her body stilled. And then, for the first time, her tail moved. A single, soft wag. The woman fastened the leash, but it remained loose. There was no pull, no resistance. They walked toward the car, May keeping pace. At the door, she paused once more. Her body turned. She looked back. The man gave no gesture, only a nod. A quiet one, barely there. The wind moved through the trees, and the last of the sunlight warmed the gravel at his feet. A bird called high above, then flew east, toward the open sky. And in that quiet, the gate closed gently behind her. The drive was long and mostly silent. The truck moved slowly across back roads that wove through farmland and wide plains, where the land stretched open and sky clung low over distant fences. It was the kind of quiet only found far from cities, where even the wind moved more carefully, brushing through fields like it remembered something. The man kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting against his leg. His face remained unreadable. Beside him, the dog lay curled on the passenger seat, head resting low, eyes flickering open and closed with the rhythm of the road. She no longer trembled. She no longer watched every move with suspicion. There was something calmer in her now. Not peace, but rest. They had left early, just after first light. He had fed her, filled her bowl with clean water, and sat beside her on the porch as she ate. She hadn't needed coaxing. Over the past week, her appetite had returned. Her ribs had softened, no longer as stark under her skin. Her gait, once uneven, had settled into a steady, measured walk. Her coat still held the dullness of time spent alone, but there were new strands coming in, glints of gold against the dirt-worn brown. She had grown quiet, not from fear, but familiarity. She moved with purpose now, though still gently, always watching the door, the sky, the man. When the call came confirming the address, he hadn't spoken much, just listened, nodded. Then set about preparing the truck for the drive. He had laid a blanket across the seat, tucked along the edges like he always did, the same blanket she had slept on since her first night inside the house. Now, as the town where she had once lived drew near, she lifted her head and looked out the window. The road narrowed between fences of whitewashed wood. Crops shifted in the fields, bent by the wind. A pair of horses stood near a gate in the distance, their heads turning slowly as the truck passed. She watched without movement, her ears tilted slightly back. There was no sudden excitement, no frantic recognition. But she didn't look away. The man glanced over once, then returned his gaze to the road. He didn't speak. There was nothing to explain. They arrived just before midday. The driveway curved along a small property bordered by trees and worn grass. The house was modest, painted pale blue, the edges weathered by seasons of rain and sun. A child's toy sat tipped on the front steps. A rake leaned against the side wall. In the distance, the faint sound of voices echoed. Not urgent, just faint pieces of conversation carried by the breeze. The truck came to a stop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the man opened his door and stepped out. He circled the vehicle and opened hers. She waited, her body still. Then, after a pause, she climbed down. Her paws touched the gravel lightly. She didn't run. She stood, head low, tail relaxed but not tucked. The house door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch. Her hands folded in front of her, uncertain. Behind her, a man appeared. Older, quiet, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. There were no outbursts, no rushing forward. Just stillness. The dog turned toward them, her ears shifting. The woman called her name, soft and unsure. May? The dog blinked, then took a step. Another. Her body moved slowly, almost cautiously, as though testing the space between memory and now. Her nose lifted slightly. She walked forward in silence, reaching the base of the steps. Then she paused. The woman crouched and whispered again. May stepped onto the first step, then the second. She reached the woman, sniffed her hands, and stood still. Her body was neutral, quiet. The woman reached out and let her fingers graze the side of May's neck. The dog didn't pull away. There were tears, quiet ones and soft words, but they didn't fill the space. They simply lingered. The man stayed where he was, hands in his pockets. His face held the weight of something unspoken, not regret, not loss, but something softer. He watched May standing there, poised between two lives, her body calm but alert. Then, slowly, she turned. Not fully. Just enough. She stepped back from the woman, turned from the house, and walked across the gravel toward him. Her paws moved with an even, slow rhythm. She reached him and stopped, standing beside his leg. Her head lowered. Then, with the softest motion, she leaned in, just enough to press her forehead lightly against his thigh. He didn't move. He only looked down, his hand resting just above his knee. She stayed there for a breath, then two, and then she stepped away. She turned again, walked back toward the house and up the steps without hesitation. Her tail swayed once, just slightly, before disappearing inside. The door closed quietly behind her. He stood there for a long while. The wind had picked up again, brushing through the trees and across the field behind the house. In the distance, a wind chime rattled softly, half muted by age and rust. The man walked back to his truck and sat behind the wheel. He didn't start the engine right away. He just watched the sky shift above the treetops where a flock of birds turned slowly overhead, drifting farther from view with each circle. Down the road, Wild grass leaned toward the fence line, moving with the wind. It bent and swayed, not hurried, just steady, like something returning home.